The cameras were rolling. 30 million Americans were watching. And Johnny Carson, the man who had interviewed presidents, survived scandals, and laughed through 2 decades of chaos, was about to break. It happened on a Tuesday night in 1979. Studio One at NBC Burbank was buzzing with the usual energy. The audience settled into their seats. Doc Severin's orchestra warmed up. Ed McMahon shuffled his cue cards. Everything was running like clockwork. Just another episode of The Tonight Show. But then Johnny saw them. 2 little girls sitting in row F. One looked about 8 years old. The other couldn't have been more than 6. They weren't laughing. They weren't waving. They were staring directly at him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. And in their small hands, they clutched a handwritten sign that read, "Please, Mr. Carson, we need to tell you something important." Johnny frowned. Children didn't look like that unless something was terribly wrong. During the commercial break, a stage manager approached his desk. "Johnny, those 2 girls have been asking for you since they arrived. Their grandmother brought them. She says it's urgent." Johnny glanced back at them. The older girl's jaw was set with determination. The younger one's eyes were red and swollen. They had been crying. "Bring them up here," Johnny said quietly. The stage manager hesitated. "We're already 4 minutes over. The producer says, I don't care what the producer says." Johnny's voice was calm but firm. "Bring them up here now." The audience had no idea what was about to happen. Neither did America. But in less than 3 minutes, Johnny Carson would hear words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Before we continue this story, let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? And if you love untold stories from the golden age of television, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we have another moment that stopped America in its tracks. What those 2 little girls whispered into Johnny's ear would become the most unforgettable moment in television history. And here on Echoes of Johnny, we bring you the stories that time forgot. The moments that made Johnny Carson a legend, one truth at a time. The Tonight Show wasn't just a TV program. It was an institution. For over 17 years, Johnny Carson had been America's nighttime companion. He made the nation laugh through Vietnam. He brought comfort during Watergate. When tragedy struck, Johnny knew exactly what to say. And when joy returned, he celebrated with millions. He was unshakable, unflappable, the king of late-night cool. Studio One in Burbank was his kingdom. 200 seats filled nightly with people who waited months for tickets. The band, the crew, the rhythm of the show. It all moved like a well-oiled machine. Johnny sat behind that iconic desk, tie perfectly knotted, hair immaculate, ready to deliver another flawless 90 minutes of entertainment. This particular Tuesday was supposed to be routine. A comedian in the first segment, a movie star promoting their latest film, maybe an animal expert with something unusual. Standard fare, but routine shattered the moment those 2 little girls stood up. The stage manager guided them down the aisle. The audience started clapping, assuming this was a planned bit. Johnny always had a soft spot for kids. Maybe this was going to be one of those sweet, spontaneous moments he was famous for. Except Johnny wasn't smiling. As the girls climbed the steps to the stage, the applause began to fade. Something felt different. The older girl held her younger sister's hand so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Both of them wore simple dresses. Nothing fancy, clearly not new. Their shoes were scuffed. Their hair had been brushed carefully, but you could tell it hadn't been done by a professional. Johnny stood from his desk. He never stood for guests during the opening segment, but he stood for them. He positioned 2 chairs next to his desk and knelt down so he was at their eye level. The cameras caught it all. Ed McMahon leaned forward in his seat, confused. Doc Severn sat down his trumpet. The entire studio went quiet. "Hello there," Johnny said softly. His voice had none of its usual performance quality. This was real. "What are your names, sweetheart?" The older girl swallowed hard. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I'm Sarah. This is my baby sister, Emily." "Well, Sarah and Emily, I saw your sign. You said you needed to tell me something important." Sarah nodded. Her hands trembled as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was wrinkled and worn, as if it had been held onto for days. And then she said 5 words that changed everything. "Can we whisper it to you?" The request hung in the air like smoke. 30 million people watching a live broadcast and 2 little girls asking to whisper a secret. Every instinct in Johnny's veteran brain told him this was a bad idea. You don't do unscripted whispers on live television. You don't hand control of the show over to children you've never met. You don't risk dead air, confusion, or worse, something inappropriate slipping through. But when Johnny looked into Sarah's eyes, he saw something that overrode every rule in the broadcasting handbook. He saw desperation. "Of course you can," Johnny said gently. He leaned in, tilting his head so his ear was close to Sarah's mouth. The studio fell into a silence so complete you could hear the hum of the stage lights. Sarah cupped her small hands around Johnny's ear and began to whisper. The cameras stayed locked on Johnny's face. America couldn't hear the words, but they could see the reaction, and what they saw would be replayed on news broadcasts for decades. Johnny's expression shifted. His eyebrows drew together, his jaw tightened. He closed his eyes as Sarah continued speaking, her tiny voice delivering words that clearly carried unbearable weight. 15 seconds passed. 20, 30. When Sarah finally pulled back, Johnny didn't move. He stayed frozen, his hand gripping the edge of his desk. His eyes remained closed. His chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths as if he was trying to steady himself. Then Emily, the 6-year-old, tugged on his sleeve. Johnny opened his eyes and looked at her. She pointed to her own mouth, then to his ear. She wanted her turn. Johnny's face was already pale, but he nodded and leaned down again. Emily's whisper was shorter, maybe 5 seconds, but the impact was devastating. This time, when Johnny pulled back, his eyes were wet. The audience saw it. Ed McMahon saw it. Doc Sevison saw it. And 30 million Americans watching from their living room saw it. Johnny Carson, the man who had maintained perfect composure through every interview, every emotional guest, every national tragedy, was fighting back tears on live television. He tried to speak, his mouth opened. Nothing came out. He cleared his throat and tried again. His voice cracked. He looked away from the camera, his hand moving to cover his mouth. Ed McMahon stood up from his chair, alarm crossing his face. "Johnny." But Johnny couldn't answer. He reached for the piece of paper Sarah had been holding. She handed it to him with shaking fingers. Johnny unfolded it slowly. Read it once, then read it again. And then America watched as Johnny Carson's famous composure shattered completely. His shoulders began to shake. He removed his glasses, something he almost never did on camera, and pressed his palm against his eyes. For the first time in tonight's show history, there was no laughter, no applause, just the sound of a grown man trying not to sob in front of the entire nation. Johnny couldn't stop the tears. They came in waves, breaking through every defense he had built over 20 years of live television. He tried to compose himself, failed, and tried again. The audience sat in stunned silence, watching their invincible host fall apart. Ed McMahon rushed to Johnny's side and put a hand on his shoulder. "Talk to me, Johnny. What's going on?" Johnny shook his head, unable to form words. He held up the paper with trembling hands so Ed could read it. Ed's face went white. It was a letter handwritten in shaky script. Hospital letterhead visible at the top. The date showed it had been written just 2 days earlier. The letter was from the girl's father. Sarah's small voice cut through the silence. She wasn't whispering anymore. Her words rang clear across the studio. "Our daddy is in the hospital, Mr. Carson. The doctors say he doesn't have much time left." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Emily, the younger sister, added in her tiny voice. "Mommy died when I was a baby. Daddy is all we have." Johnny looked at them, his face wet with tears, and managed to speak. "What did you whisper to me, sweetheart?" Sarah's chin trembled, but she stood tall. "I told you that Daddy watches your show every single night, even in his hospital room. He says, you're the kindest man on television." Emily jumped in. "And I told you that Daddy said if anyone in the whole world could help us, it would be you." "Help you with what?" Johnny's voice was barely audible. Sarah pulled in a shaking breath. "When Daddy dies, they're going to separate us. We don't have any other family except Grandma, and she's too sick to take care of both of us." The social worker said, "Emily will go to one foster home and I'll go to another one." The words landed like a bomb. The audience erupted in gasps and sobs. Women covered their mouths. Men wiped their eyes. Even the camera operators were crying. Emily grabbed her sister's hand. "I don't want to lose Sarah. She's all I have left." Johnny pressed both hands against his face. His shoulders shook violently. When he finally lowered his hands, his eyes were red and his voice was thick with emotion. "How old are you girls?" "I'm 8, Sarah said. Emily just turned 6. Johnny looked at the letter again, then directly into camera. 1.30 million Americans saw raw, unfiltered pain on his face. "I've been doing this show for 17 years, he said, his voice breaking with every word. I've interviewed presidents, movie stars, heroes, but I have never," he stopped, overcome. "I have never been more honored than I am right now to be sitting with the two bravest people I have ever met." The audience exploded in applause, but Johnny held up his hand. "Your daddy is watching right now, isn't he?" Both girls nodded, tears streaming down their faces. Johnny looked directly into the camera. "Sir, I don't know you, but I know you raised two incredible daughters. And I give you my word." His voice cracked. He steadied himself. "I give you my word. They will never be separated. Never." The studio erupted. People were standing, crying, applauding. Ed McMahon had tears running down his face. Doc Severinsen openly wept. But Johnny wasn't finished. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his personal checkbook. On live television in front of 30 million people, he opened it and began to write. "This is a start," he said, his hands shaking as he wrote. "But America, I need your help. NBC, put a phone number on the screen. These girls are going to have a future, and we're going to make sure of it." Ed McMahon stepped forward, pulling out his own checkbook. "Johnny, I'm matching whatever you write." From the orchestra pit, Doc Severinsen stood. "Count us in." One by one, band members stood. Audience members stood. The entire studio became a wave of people rising to their feet. And in that moment, television stopped being entertainment. It became a movement. The scheduled celebrity guest never made it on stage that night. The commercial breaks were skipped. NBC executives watched from the control room in shock as their carefully planned show transformed into something unprecedented. Johnny refused to end the segment. The phone lines at NBC lit up like a wildfire. Operators were overwhelmed within minutes. Americans from every state were calling asking how they could help. Donations poured in so fast the network couldn't keep track. Then the studio phone rang. A production assistant answered. Listened and went pale. She walked onto the stage during the live broadcast and whispered something to Johnny. Johnny's eyes widened. "Patch it through to the studio speakers." The audience held its breath. A weak, raspy male voice filled the studio. "Mr. Carson, this is David Mitchell. I'm Sarah and Emily's father." The girls gasped. "Daddy." "Hi, baby girls." The voice said, and you could hear him fighting to keep it steady. "I'm watching you right now. You were so brave." Sarah and Emily both started crying. Johnny motioned for them to come closer to the microphone on his desk. "We love you, Daddy," they said in unison. "I love you both so much." There was a long pause, the sound of labored breathing. "Mr. Carson, I don't know what to say. I can't believe this is happening." Johnny leaned toward the microphone, his voice thick. "Sir, your daughters came here because they believed in something. They believed that people are good. They believed that someone would care. And they were right. I just wanted them to stay together." David's voice cracked. "That's all I wanted. I couldn't die knowing they'd be torn apart." "They won't be," Johnny said firmly. "You have my word. I'm going to personally make sure they're placed together. I'll fund whatever it takes. Legal fees, housing, education, everything." Ed McMahon stepped closer. "You've got my word, too, sir." From the audience, an elderly woman stood. Sarah and Emily's grandmother. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I'm their grandma. I wanted to keep them, but I'm sick and I don't have the money for." Johnny cut in gently. "You're going to have all the help you need. I promise you that." An NBC executive appeared on stage, something that had never happened during a live broadcast. "Mr. Carson, the network wants to make an announcement. We're matching your contribution, and we'll cover all legal expenses to keep these girls together." The audience erupted again. People were openly weeping. David's voice came through the speakers one more time. "Mr. Carson, how can I ever thank you?" Johnny looked at Sarah and Emily, both clinging to each other, and his voice broke again. "You already did, sir. You raised these two angels. That's thanks enough." But what happened next would become the most replayed moment in television history. The hospital called again 30 minutes later. This time it was the doctor. Johnny took the call on speakerphone, still on live television. "This is Dr. Reynolds from Cedars-Sinai. Mr. Carson, I've been monitoring our patient during your broadcast." "How is he?" Johnny asked. "His vital signs have stabilized. The emotional relief, the hope you've given him. It's having a real physiological effect. I can't promise anything, but he's fighting harder now." Johnny closed his eyes and nodded. "Can he hear me?" "Yes, we have the TV on in his room." Johnny looked directly at the camera. "David, I want you to listen to me. You focus on fighting. Your girls are taken care of. The entire country is rallying around them. You focus on getting better. Sarah suddenly spoke up. Daddy, me and Emily are going to be okay. You don't have to worry anymore. Emily added, we're going to be together forever, just like you wanted. The doctor's voice softened. He's nodding. He hears you. In the following days, the story exploded across America. Newspapers ran front-page stories. NBC received over $800,000 in donations within 48 hours. A trust fund was established. Legal teams worked around the clock. And 3 weeks later, Sarah and Emily were placed with a foster family who had been thoroughly vetted and approved, one that agreed to keep them together and allow their grandmother regular visits. Johnny kept his promise in ways the public never knew. He visited the girls regularly, always off camera. He attended their school events. When they graduated high school years later, he was there. And when college came, he quietly paid for everything. David Mitchell passed away 5 weeks after that broadcast. But he died knowing his daughters would never be separated. And Johnny Carson carried those whispered words with him for the rest of his life. The episode was never rerun during Johnny's lifetime. He considered it too personal, too sacred, but it became the most requested footage in NBC's archives. Years later, in a rare private interview before his retirement, Johnny was asked about the most meaningful moment of his career. He didn't hesitate. 2 little girls who had the courage to ask for help. They reminded me what television is really for. It's not about ratings or fame. It's about connection. It's about showing up when it matters. Sarah and Emily grew up to become teachers. Both dedicated their lives to working with foster children. In 2010, Sarah gave a single interview about that night. Johnny Carson saved our lives, she said. But more than that, he taught America something important. He showed that when you speak up, when you ask for help, people will listen. Our father died in peace because of Johnny. And we grew up together because he cared. The whispers that broke Johnny Carson weren't words of tragedy alone. They were words of trust. 2 children betting everything on the belief that kindness still existed in the world. And Johnny proved them right. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most powerful truths. And sometimes it takes breaking down to build something beautiful. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what it meant to you. Here on Echoes of Johnny, we uncover the moments that defined a generation. The tears, the laughter, and the humanity behind the man who made America smile for 30 years. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because tomorrow we have another echo from Johnny's legacy that will leave you speechless. Until then, remember the best stories are the ones that remind us what it means to be human. We'll see you in the next.